Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking some truly fascinating source material and transforming it into a visual journey. And honestly, we are looking at a slice of history today that proves truth is way, way stranger than fiction.
So what do World War II spies, Henry Kissinger, and Egyptian belly dancers actually have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really weird joke, right? But it's an entirely true historical narrative that reads exactly like a Hollywood espionage thriller. The answer ties directly into the incredible life and highly unusual diplomatic strategies of former Egyptian President Anwar Sadat.
To make sense of this decade-spanning story, here is our roadmap. First, we'll look at dance and politics. Second, the Zamalek houseboat. Third, Kissinger and Najwa Fuad. And finally, Sadat's paradoxes.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Dance and Politics, the Political Stage.
Before we meet our spies, we absolutely have to understand this core concept called dance diplomacy. Our sources detail how traditional dance wasn't just, background entertainment. It was a highly unique, highly effective political tool in Egypt. Think of it as a way to project soft power, break the ice during incredibly tense global negotiations, and just charm foreign dignitaries. In a world of super rigid protocol, a cultural performance offered this rare, shared human experience.
And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible arc of Anwar Sadat's life. Our sources point out that his connection to the dance world didn't actually start in a fancy presidential palace. No, it started when he was a young man on the run. He was literally hiding out in the homes and houseboats of famous dancers just to escape British authorities. He experienced this world from the very bottom, and eventually, he utilized it from the very top.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Zamalek houseboat and World War II espionage.
If we track the events of Operation Salaam, we can see exactly how a highly strategic military operation ended up centered around a floating nightclub on the Nile. Back in mid-June of 1942, the German military desperately needed intelligence on British forces in Egypt. So they send two spies, Epler and Sandsteed, right into Cairo. And where do they set up their secret radio? On a houseboat owned by a famous belly dancer. And a young Anwar Sadat, who was a revolutionary officer trying to expel the British at the time, actually came aboard to help them fix their broken radio equipment.
What is truly fascinating here is this wild cast of characters. You've got Hekmat Fahmy, a massively famous dancer entertaining British troops at the Kit Kat Club by night, while extracting their military secrets for the Germans by day. You have the German spies, you have the young revolutionary Sadat. But get this, the entire operation was brought crashing down by a French courtesan named Yvette. The German spies just got sloppy. They were spending massive amounts of counterfeit British pounds on Cairo's nightlife. And after paying Yvette lavishly for an evening, she got suspicious, tipped off British intelligence, and boom. Everyone, including Sadat and the dancer, was arrested.
So looking at this, it perfectly captures Sadat's wild evolution. He goes from being this fugitive thrown into a prison camp for espionage in the 1940s to becoming the actual president of Egypt in the 1970s. Decades later, he's holding all the cards, leveraging the exact same cultural charm he grew up around to forge massive geopolitical alliances.
This leads us perfectly into Section 3, Kissinger and Najwa Fuad, and Cold War charm.
During the 70s, the U.S. was super eager to build a relationship with Egypt. The Cold War is raging, and the U.S. really wants to pull Egypt away from the Soviet sphere of influence. This required incredibly delicate, high-level negotiations, but Sadat, remembering his past, knew exactly how to break the ice and completely disarm his Western counterparts.
You see, high-level negotiations were frequently followed by specific cultural entertainment. U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger later revealed that after these long, grueling days of political debates, Sadat's administration would host dinners, and Kissinger became absolutely captivated by a legendary Egyptian dancer named Najwa Fuad, saying he always made sure she was present at these soirees.
And Fuad wasn't just background music. The sources detail how she became a central fixture of these diplomatic visits. She performed traditional Nubian and Bedouin dances, really showcasing Egyptian heritage. She danced at the massive celebration for the Camp David peace accords. There's even a story in our sources where Kissinger, right before leaving Egypt, had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs urgently track Fuad down in Alexandria and rush her 3 hours back to Cairo by car, literally just so he could see her perform one last time before his flight. I mean, her diplomatic reach was huge. She performed for U.S. President Jimmy Carter, King Hussein, you name it.
Sadat was highly aware of this dynamic. He playfully told another famous dancer, Soher Zaki, that her performances totally transcended the Cold War divide. She had actually just broken protocol by stepping off the stage to dance directly in front of U.S. President Richard Nixon and Sadat. Security tried to stop her, but Nixon just waved them off. Sadat thought it was hilarious, acknowledging that she was successfully charming both the American and Soviet blocs through her art.
And the sources even recount a hilarious reversal of this dynamic in Washington. When Sadat visited the White House, he requested American folklore music. So they brought in the famous jazz singer Pearl Bailey. Now, Bailey had been strictly warned by protocol officers absolutely not to dance with Sadat. But the moment the music started, she totally ignored the rules, grabbed the Egyptian president, and pulled him right onto the dance floor. To prevent a massive diplomatic embarrassment, U.S. President Gerald Ford had to use some quick thinking. He immediately grabbed Sadat's wife, Jihan, and joined them on the floor. It completely broke the tension, and observers literally called it one of Ford's greatest diplomatic triumphs.
All right, now we have to turn to our final section. Section 4, Sadat's Paradoxes and His Complex Legacy.
Because the strategy of using dancers for diplomacy reached its most bizarre peak when an American congressman used it right back at the Egyptians. This is the actual history behind the famous story of Charlie Wilson's War. U.S. Congressman Charlie Wilson wanted to secretly arm Afghan fighters against the Soviets in the 80s. But the U.S. couldn't give them American weapons or it would trigger a direct war with Russia. They needed Soviet-made weapons, and Egypt had plenty of them. So what does Wilson do? He brings an American belly dancer from Texas named Carol Shannon on his diplomatic trip to Cairo. Her presence was specifically used to charm top Egyptian military officials like Abu Ghazala, just to secure those weapons.
And you know what? It worked. That crazy bit of reverse dance diplomacy helped secure up to $750 million a year for the fighters by the end of the 1980s. I mean, $750 million. It just demonstrates the massive, earth-shifting geopolitical stakes involved in these cultural exchanges.
But here is where the story takes a much darker and more complex turn. The source authors point out a striking historical paradox here. They note this sharp contrast between the government's cultural cosmopolitanism and the factions it was simultaneously empowering, because while Sadat was using the arts, culture, and dance to charm the West and project this very liberal, cosmopolitan image of Egypt to the world, domestically, his administration was facilitating the transfer of weapons to fundamentalist fighters in Afghanistan. The sources note that this double-sided policy directly contributed to the rise of the exact same religious extremist factions that would eventually lead to Sadat's own tragic assassination in 1981.
So ultimately, this explainer leaves us with a profound contradiction to consider regarding how political legacies are truly built. How does a leader who hid in the houseboats of dancers as a fugitive and then used their art to charm the likes of Henry Kissinger and secure world peace simultaneously empower the fundamentalist movements that ended his life? It is a stark reminder of the unexpected, deeply complex, and honestly often contradictory ways history remembers its leaders. Thank you so much for joining us on this visual journey through the sources, and we will see you next time.